Hi, Ben.
Hello.
Everyone, this is Ben Bach. He is our cinematographer extraordinaire for Why Dig When You Can Pluck. And I am Cambria, as always, the writer-director. And I thought it would be fun to share Ben with you and share more about his work on the film and his inspirations and his process and all of the things going on in Ben Brain. So welcome, Ben. Let's start with how you developed the visual style for the film.
Yeah. So honestly, it started with a lot of conversations with you. I think, as far as I can remember, from very, very early on, possibly the very beginning, you had some strong ideas of, like, if not exactly what you wanted the film to look like, at least films and filmmakers whose work uh inspired you. And so through many conversations, um and and watching a lot of movies, uh I was able to sort of, you like, I think what I remember most was you just being like, I like this movie, I like this director, and some of those films I had seen, some I hadn't. um and you weren't necessarily like, you wouldn't come to me with a specific thing like, I like camera movement that feels this way, or um you actually were very, you were locked into a 4:3 aspect ratio. I think that was like the one sort of very specific thing that you came to me with. You're like, it's got to be 4:3. Um, but outside of that, you just sort of came to me with stuff that you really liked. Um, and so, like, through our conversations, and through sitting down and watching these movies together, um, I was able to sort of like learn what about those films did it for you. Uh, and um, some of the films that we watched um, were Persona, which is an Ingmar Bergman movie. Um, we watched Down by Law, which is a Jim Jarmusch film. Um, we watched Certain Women and First Cow, which are Kelly Reichardt films. Um, we talked about The Lighthouse. Did we watch The Lighthouse
Yeah,
together as research? I mean, I know we saw it together.
we watched it and we kind of were like, oh, actually, this is like has nothing to do with our film,
Yeah,
but it was
yeah,
fun to watch anyway.
yeah. I mean, it's an awesome movie.
So just knowing that, like, Kelly Reichardt stuff in particular was like a huge um in like inspiration for me. Like, what are some of the things that, like, when we would watch, like, we would talk about stuff, like, tell us about like the kinds of things we would talk about when we were watching those movies.
yeah. Um, I think the thing that sort of struck me the most about the camera work um, in those two films, really in all of the Kelly Reichardt films that I've seen, um, is that it's it's a little emotionally removed um, from the action, from the characters. Um, yeah, I think there's like a school of thought where the camera is in the scene, the camera is with the actors, with with the character. You feel their emotions. You know, a war movie where someone's like running, there's bombs exploding, and the camera's all shaky, like behind them or something like that, like putting you in the action. And with Kelly Reichardt's films, it's the opposite. You aren't there. You're not on the battlefield. Um, you aren't, I don't know what, in the boat with the person. You're not walking down a path with them. You are. The camera is watching someone walk down the path. Um,
Mhm.
and
More observational.
yeah, exactly. There's less emotion. In fact, there's arguably like no emotion in the camera work. You are sort of like learning about these characters as the action unfolds, um, rather than sort of feeling what they're feeling. Um,
Which
and
like, which was, is not your sort of like um general
de-
preference.
default, yeah. I think my default is to be much more in the middle of the action, to really sort of put the camera um I want like a visceral feeling of whatever moment is going on in the film. I think that's sort of like, that's my default, and probably that's just because like that's what I like. I like to watch movies that have those visuals. I like uh it tends to be kind of fun to shoot. um you know i I think I'm a very sort of like from the gut person. And if I'm reading a script and there's an emotional scene, um when I'm shooting it, I want to be feeling the emotion while I'm shooting it. And one really great way to do that is to have camera work that evokes that emotion, you know. Um,
Well, so since we didn't do that for the most part, um,
no, not at all.
but you've seen the footage and I think it looks really beautiful and we've gotten some like pretty nice feedback about it. How would you say like mm, given the constraints that like we sort of developed, like, we developed, or I guess maybe first tell us like kind of what some of those constraints were that we developed. Like we developed kind of like a language and kind of like you talked a lot about like the dogma of the film, like, of the sort of like for the cinematography of the film. Like, and then sort of like how how it felt like as a cinematographer to like, adopt those rules.
Yes. So the dogma, the rules,
Yeah.
um, were that any camera movement that was going to happen, um, I wanted it to have, I wanted to be very, what I think of as like classic camera moves. So things on a dolly, pans and tilts, you know, no handheld, no steady cam, no drone or aerial footage, really stuff from like, I think like, I don't know if you want to call it like the golden age of cinema, but some of the sort of like established language from major films that we've all sort of grown up with. I also wanted to make sure that when and if those camera moves happened, that they're always motivated, and that they should feel pretty inconspicuous. The goal is not to draw attention to the camera move. The goal was always going to be to make sure that the audience's attention was on whatever the important thing was in the scene,
Right. Which is generally like our actors.
which is almost always a person. Exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's one thing that like Kelly Reichardt does, that you were really into as well. And I've actually seen you do like in other films that you've done, like not trying to emulate anybody, but I think that's just sort of like what you're drawn to, is you're drawn to sticking with the person, or sticking with the subject, whatever that subject is. So nothing that distracted from the character.
And how did that like, and we did a lot of mediums, right?
Yeah, that's the other thing. I think again, going back to like my default, and wanting to be like up in the emotion, up in the action, almost being having like a physical sensation, or like you almost, you can like taste what's going on. That doesn't allow you to be observational. There's no impartiality to that style of cinematography, and that just didn't, that wasn't what you wanted. Like across the board, all the things that you said that you liked, all the films you liked, the directors that you liked, just like universally, they don't do that. They do have, the camera work has a level of apartness. So, instead of getting like real close up, shallow depth of field of, I don't know what, someone having some crazy emotion, we stayed a little further away. And never too far away that you can't see what's going on, but enough so that you're observing what's going on without being a part of it.
And then this is just kind of like a kind of a strange question, but like given that you like to like be, like I know that you really like being close to an actor's performance, like you like being close to kind of what's happening in front of the camera. So how did it like, did you feel like you were kind of like, yeah, how did it feel being like having
like
that kind
not
of like,
doing that?
yeah.
Yeah, I think going into it before we actually shot, I was worried because it was a style that I hadn't done a lot of. And you know, anybody who is a filmmaker or a cinematographer or a department head anywhere, uh in any part of the crew, I think anybody who does like any sort of creative pursuit wants to make stuff as good as possible, you know. um and so there's definitely like a little bit of trepidation going in, because I'm going into something that's unknown. um However, I think because of the amount of prep that we did, um, once we got onto set, it actually wasn't that bad. I mean, it wasn't hard. Um, I think there were probably some times where I might like frame something up, and you'd be like, Ben, that's too close. Like, kind of like in the heat of the moment. Um, or if I don't know what, distracted, or I'm giving directions to a bunch of different people at once, or I'm tired, it's the end of the day. Uh it's really good to have another person around who can sort of remind me that we got to stay on track, and what we're making. It's like, okay, yes, that's right, mediums, pull back a little bit more. So yeah, it wasn't hard. Um and I'm happy with what we got. Uh it's really important to me as a cinematographer. I think personally, I believe that one sign of a good cinematographer is that you can develop and execute different visual styles, um, because each director that you work with is going to be different. They're going to like different things. Each story is going to ask something different. And at the end of the day, our work as cinematographers is there to serve the story and the director's vision. So if you only know
Which
how
you
to,
crushed at. Thank you.
oh,
Just
yes,
do a little.
that's good. That's good.
Yeah. Good
Yeah,
listen.
if you only know how to do one thing as a cinematographer, like one style of visual, I mean, that's really cool, but that's pretty limiting. And that doesn't really work for me personally. Like, uh I think I would probably get bored no matter what that visual style was. um
So how did this was in black and white and 4:3. I guess black and white you had we'd kind of started dabbling in prior to this, and 4:3 we had also done together. Yeah.
yeah, I
But
forgot about that.
never at the
Yeah, for
same
No More
time.
Dope Parties.
Yeah.
I totally forgot about that. I was thinking that this was like the first 4x3 project, but no.
Nope.
Yeah, you wanted black and white, I think, from the jump. Like,
And how was it like handling yeah, I wanted black and white. I just always saw the film in black and white, and once I saw it, I just couldn't pick it. There was just like no talking me out of it. Despite the fact that I think you tried to.
good.
So given that we kept it in black and white, and in 4:3, like what kinds of like considerations did you like take into account when you were just like, yeah, when you were going about your business? Like, I guess,
Yeah.
yeah, for both of those.
So there are definitely different considerations, shooting black and white versus color. I'll go through a list. First and foremost, I think you often have to shoot at a deeper stop than you might in color, because you don't have the additional color information within a frame. If you have super shallow depth of focus, it's really easy for whatever's in the background to just kind of get gray and muddy, and not be particularly interesting. The other thing that's really important, is you want as much like contrast as possible. So contrast in your lights and darks. So sometimes, um, you know, you could have in a if you're shooting a piece that's in color, you could have you know a blue and a pink, of like very similar values, right? And they will stand out, they will pop when you put them right next to each other. If you're shooting black and white, those could look very similar in black and white.
Mhm.
And that makes for a less interesting frame. So what you really want is you want sort of like a salt and pepper of visual, texture throughout a frame. So instead, like with wardrobe, instead of thinking about like, oh, what color are they wearing? It's, oh, is that going to be like, is that really dark? Or is that really light? Um,
Yeah.
that's way more important than, do we have red or green, or, like contrasting colors don't matter at all.
And then talk about like I remember you saying, like, because some days we wanted like hard sun all the time and we didn't get it.
Yeah.
And I remember you saying, like, that's okay, like, you know, we're we're gonna get away with this because we're shooting in black and white.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Um, Bright sun can be really nice for contrast, even with black and white. But because we had chosen wardrobe that was very high contrast, even on a gray day, you're still going to get a visually interesting frame.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, I think I'll leave it there. I won't I won't dive too deep. But yeah, yeah. I think that, well, there is one other sort of thing that's great about shooting in black and white in this kind of condition, and that's that, like, um, the color of light on a gray day is very different than the color of light on a sunny day. And when you're shooting in black and white, you can't see that color difference.
Mm.
So uh, things will be much more consistent across the entire film because we got to shoot in black and white versus if we were shooting in color. Um, and
And
that's, we lucked out.
in some ways. Um, what about like the 4:3 element? Like, how did that impact your compositions? Yeah, any other aspect of shooting?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things are similar compositionally. You can use some techniques, like rule of thirds, for example, in 4:3, just like you can with any other aspect ratio. Um,
I mean, I was really into 4:3 because I really wanted like I think portraits look, really amazing in 4:3. And you would just sort of like continually put together these like stunning, like sort of single portraits of our actors.
yeah,
Like I know that, I don't know. I think that they like maybe felt similar to you, but like, looking at the footage, like they're all super dynamic and like it doesn't feel repetitive at all.
that's good. Yeah. Yeah, portraits can be really nice in 4:3, because you don't have a whole lot of extraneous information. Um,
Mhm.
when you're cutting off the set, like I'm looking at myself right now, in this 16:9 little zoom window. And if we like cut off the sides here, um, really what's filling the frame is just the individual. We're not being distracted by anything else. Um, so that can be incredibly useful. Um, it tells the viewer where to look, which is like look at this character. Um, 4:3 can feel a little cramped sometimes,
Mhm.
um, which can be really good, especially for a film like this where there's some drama. Um, there are some things going on with all these characters, where they are feeling, you know, stressed, moments of difficulty, and feeling, you know, trapped in whatever emotion they're in, is really helpful as a filmmaker. So yeah, 4:3 can really help achieve that. Um, yeah, I think my takeaway with 4:3 after shooting this whole movie in it, um, is that it really helps you focus on whatever's in the frame. You're taking out the information, and the only thing that is left is the most important bit. Um, and it's kind of cool.
Yeah, and I really wanted like the setting was very important to me, but I didn't want it to be it was like it was the inspiration for the whole film and it was um really impacting the characters, but I didn't want it to be sort of like artificially beautiful or like distracting from the characters. And so we see the glimpses of where they, you know we see where they are, but it's not like these like wide panoramas, like on the beach or of the ocean or whatnot. Like it really kind of gets, yeah,
Yeah,
the focus to be on the characters.
yeah. It's like
And
when the
like you
characters
were
are
saying,
in
like not have
frame,
that extra information distract.
right? Exactly. Yeah, whenever the characters are in frame, uh, almost always, like they are filling the frame. If it's a two shot, it's two bodies filling the frame. If it's a three
Yeah.
shot, it's three bodies filling the frame. Um, and we do have those really pretty, uh, you know, landscape shots or nature shots in there, but um, they're their own shots.
Mhm.
um and and uh and that was really important to you, to keep those, to keep the moments where, when there's a character there, um that's where the focus is.
Yeah. I feel like you almost just like can't miss with 4x3. Like I love the compositions that it like engenders, for lack of a non-fancy word. Um to say that. Like, yeah, I just love the way things look in 4x3. Um and it did feel, for all of the reasons that like you mentioned, like it just felt right. Like, the way that it allows us to like look at a single person and not be distracted by anything else, and like the different configurations, like the way that three people can fit in a frame, the way that two people fit in a frame, like that was all really fun. um
Yeah, it's very different than like 2 3 5 to 1, like real wide.
yeah, 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 I love it. Like, you know I wouldn't be surprised if I wanted to do it again. um uh
You're gonna
but on the next one. But yeah, I wanted to ask you about like logistics. Well, also just first, like I feel like people want to know like what we shot this with, and like lenses and stuff. Like it doesn't have to be in depth, just like
Yeah. So we shot this with a red Epic Dragon on Cook Pancros.
nice. And we talked a bunch actually about like lenses, and I mean there was like a bunch of considerations, like not the least of which was financial, but we shout out to Sally at Kerner, right? Like got um a hold of some really beautiful lenses that I know you were really happy with. And we wanted like, tell us about what we wanted with like the look of the lenses.
Yeah. I mean, long story short, older was better.
Yeah.
Older just had a little more character, um, which feels a little more classic, which fits our camera movement, um, which fits the black and white. Um, and when we looked at all of the inspiration films, um, none of those were shot on like super crisp glass. Um, had we done that, uh, this film would look a lot different. I don't think that it would have some of the sort of organic prettiness that it does. Uh,
It feels very like textural.
Textual, yes.
I feel like you can sort of feel, I don't know, like, yeah, you can feel like, grains of sand, really like literally like granular, um like grains of sand, and just like the wash of water, and um
Yeah, yeah, and
I
well,
like that on
admittedly,
just looking really
you would get
nice.
that regardless. Uh, you know, the lenses that we used were pretty soft as lenses go.
Mhm.
Um, had we used something that was more modern, all the tiny detail would stand out. It might start to feel a little like stark or too sharp.
Mhm.
Um, and you also, that's actually one thing we didn't talk about earlier, was that like you also really don't like digital feeling imagery.
That's true.
Um, And I think everything that we watched might have been shot on film. Uh, First Cow, can't remember if First Cow was shot on film or not. Um, but yeah, a lot of the stuff that we watched was shot on film, and you really like the look of film. Um, so really sharp lenses on this digital camera um, is not, that's not traveling towards the film look. That's traveling in the opposite direction.
Yeah. Okay, so um let's talk about the logistics of our location and like, yeah, how you as the DP, how our location logistics like impacted your choices. Yeah,
Yeah. I mean,
because we were outside like, 95% of the time. We were, down, for the most part, we were like down on a beach that had like a pretty like long and steep pathway, like from a bluff down to the beach. And it was, sort of smooth enough that we could get carts down there. But it was like a pretty solid haul. Not to mention going back up at the end of the day.
yeah,
Not to mention just like working on like sand,
yeah. I think there are pros and cons to working on location, especially with an indie film where you don't have a ton of budget. Um, the pro is that sometimes you can find a location that looks really awesome without that much tweaking. Uh, the con is that sometimes it's not in a super accessible location. And so we found the spots, which was amazing. But they were not always in a super accessible location. There was often like a solid, it's like cool, it's gonna be like a 15-minute walk. Like, um, so we had to be pretty light. Um,
Mhm.
and we were about as light as you could be while still achieving the look that we wanted. Um, uh, so yeah. I mean, the name of the game was really like, if possible, just one trip. Like, carry,
Down the
yeah, every individual um, carry something, but that we all just make one trip. And if there is more gear than that, then like that's a problem. And so like for the next day, we figure out how do we achieve this stuff with even less gear. So it was like it was an iterative process of just paring down to like the absolute essentials so that everybody you know had everything they needed to do their job, but also um, there wasn't so much stuff that all of a sudden like making this film becomes unfeasible, it becomes a logistical nightmare.
um yeah, I want to shout out all of your ACs, which, just delightful, wonderful, wonderful people, each and every one of them.
Yeah, we got super lucky. All of them were rad. Um, Cannon, who was our first AC, and Marcy, who was our second on the first part of the film down in Brookings were super awesome. I've worked with Canon plenty before, and she's rad. I had not worked with Marcy. I had always heard good things, and unsurprisingly, Marcy was fantastic. I really appreciated both of their attitudes, and like I prepped them going in. They knew what they were walking into, but yeah, I really appreciate their attitude and their professionalism, and everything. Like, looked great. We did not get sand into any cameras or lenses, which is a lot harder than it sounds. So yeah, they crushed. And then Anda on the second half that we shot closer to Portland.
And Chris.
What's that?
And Chris.
And Chris, yeah. Were also both amazing. And I, I knew them both beforehand, and I knew that they would be on top of stuff. But yeah, I got really lucky that all of those people were available for this.
Yeah, thank you everyone so much. And yeah, any kind of wrapping up here, I wanted to ask you about like kind of standout moments, like, proudest moments, most challenging moments, any moments that like stand out to you from shooting that people should know about.
That's a good question. I don't know if there's like one specific moment that I'm particularly proud of. I think the two things that I am the proudest of are I pride myself at being able to put talent at ease. Actors are trusting me, and and so it's really important for me to it's important for me that they feel respected, that they feel considered, and yeah, I at one point, so I forget if like she told me directly, or if this was information that was, she told somebody else and then that got passed on to me. But Soul had mentioned feeling very well taken care of by me, and that's something I take great pride in. And then the other thing is, I'm proud of the visuals that I created for this film. This is a style that I don't normally work in. So, and I was able to create what I feel is a consistent, interesting film visually from start to finish. So yeah, those are the things that I'm the most proud of. And difficult, I mean, there wasn't anything particularly difficult, to be honest. It's, film is its own challenge. Like, it is always a challenge. Like, that's just filmmaking. And yes, I suppose every film has its own sort of unique set of challenges, um, but it never felt out of the ordinary. Um, so yeah, I mean that's what you do as a filmmaker. Like even on the commercial stuff that I've shot that has like way bigger budgets than any of the indie, narrative stuff that I shoot. You still have to creatively problem solve. Um, that's just part of making this stuff. I haven't shot a Marvel movie. Um, my impression is that there is a lot more pre-planning. We still do a ton of pre-planning in the stuff that I do. You and I did a ton of pre-planning for this film. Um, so I can't really speak to how much creative problem solving happens in the moment on set on something like a Marvel movie. But I know certainly all the type of work that I do, both commercial and you know indie narrative, um, there is always a certain level of creative problem solving on set, and um, that's just the name of the game. That's making movies.
And cut. That seems like a good place to seems like a good place to end.